My name is Mara Averick, and I work at RStudio, where I'm the Tidyverse developer advocate, which means that I'm not a real data scientist. I don't know if this will, I don't know if the highlight thing will work given the screen setup, but like I don't know Flash. My KML is a little rusty. Anyway, if you know me at all, it's probably from Twitter, which is maybe a little less than 95% of what I do, but that's a joke. You can just assume most of what I'm saying is a joke. My background is actually in science and society. So again, if anyone has any questions about science and or society at any point afterwards, just let me know. Also a joke. It's not, in case you guys aren't getting that. Now it's known as science and technology studies. It's like a deeply interdisciplinary field. So as an undergraduate, I spent a lot of time basically studying scientists. And this is from this kind of seminal science and technology studies paper where she, the author Sharon Trawick says, like many groups that don't reproduce biologically, experimental particle physicists, they renew themselves by training novices. And I've found that that's actually the case for open source communities as well, to my knowledge. Also a joke. I'm just gonna let you guys know every time so you can laugh for me. So as I said, I work at RStudio. Kind of quick overview of it is that I work completely on open source tools. The Tidyverse is all open source, R packages. And essentially the business model, to my level of understanding, not that high, is that we create open source tools that create demand for our enterprise products, which are then invested back into making cool open source tools. And about 58% of the company is engineering, and about 58% of our engineering is open source. So if anyone wants to play with fractions or anything like that. How many people here have heard of R? Oh, great. Listen, I asked that at NeurIPS, and it was not as high. So yeah, R has been around for about 25 years, formerly S. Anybody here use S? Nice, all right, way to represent R and R. So Robert Gentleman and Rossi Haka founded it, and basically the whole kind of ecosystem where a lot of the development is happening in R is on top of base R. There are over 12,000 packages on CRAN, including the Tidyverse packages. The Tidyverse would not be possible without base R. I know that sometimes is confusing for people. So that's awesome, and thank you, CRAN, for all you do. So is anyone here familiar with the Tidyverse? Cool, all right, so some of you are gonna learn a little about what it is. Yeah, so the Tidyverse is an opinionated collection of R packages designed for data science. Hadley Wickham, who's my supervisor, wrote many of them, and now we have a much larger team. And basically, all of the packages share an underlying design philosophy and also a grammar and data structure. So tidy data, which is, for people who are database people, it's not that shocking, but like each variable is a column, each row is an observation. That shape essentially works with all the Tidyverse packages. And tidy tools these are kind of the design principles behind things. They're simple, every function does one thing and does it well. Composable, so we use pipes to connect them, and they're designed for humans. So a lot of the function names in the Tidyverse are things like filter, for when you're filtering data. Clever, that Hadley is really on top of things. And it's really about literate programming. So for us, one of the things we prioritize is having readable code. And that's something that kind of grew out of Hadley's early experience. We're doing a lot of programming for applied scientists and kind of thinking like, wow, they could do this themselves if they could use these tools. So this is what kind of the data science process looks like in the Tidyverse. Kind of import data, you get it in, shocking. Tidy, get it in that special shape, transform it, wrangle it, visualize, model, and communicate. Some of the packages which you may or may not have heard of, dplyr, ggplot2 is a big appealing visualization package, and tidyr. But kind of zooming out from the specifics here, here's the cycle right there. And really, definitely a lot of time is spent tidying, but this middle part here this is an iterative cycle. This is where you're trying to understand your data, you're modeling, you're augmenting, those aren't quick steps. And luckily, it just so happens that at our RStudio conf, which was a couple weeks ago, a friend of mine, Matt Dancho, who has a company called Business Science, gave an excellent talk using R and the Tidyverse with H2O and Shiny to reduce employee attrition. So you can see, for those of you who use H2O, which I'm guessing is many of you, how that, for example, can fit in that same kind of framework. But for better or for worse, R is definitely a computer language for scientists. It very much had a reputation as like for statisticians and therefore only for statistics. It definitely has a lot of statistics in there, but that's not the only thing it can do. And if my pointer was working, I would be pointing to the area between the brain and R. Kind of in the Tidyverse, we try and get things even a little bit closer to human cognition, so that basically the time that you spend thinking about writing code, that often takes more time than actually writing the code. We try and cut that down. So a lot of the people who use it are towards the practitioner end of this spectrum here. So you have practitioners and programmers with a lot of different assumptions about what their code is and what it does. And I don't know if anybody was familiar with Joel Gress's Notebook Wars. Anyone party to that? Well, boy, if you want some sweet data science controversy, you can look that up. So yeah, what does it mean to have a bunch of people, and when I say a bunch, I mean like hundreds of thousands of people using your packages, which are open source, who are not necessarily programmers. So what does that look like? And what does this mean for contribution and sustainability? Those are guiding questions. There is a really cool event that I have not gone to yet called Sustain. And I think Mozilla underwrites it and others. And essentially, they identified kind of 4 key groups of actors in free and open source software. You have the maintainers, so that central person who has a large burden on their back. Contributors, consumers/users, which that's been a tricky thing in open source in recent years when you have people who are not used to an open source model and will write you like a really angry issue about your free product not meeting their standards. I've never fielded one of those. And they came up with this new idea of kind of sustainers. So these are people who are thinking about the ecosystem, the open source ecosystem, the packages, and trying to essentially make things more sustainable. And so from this report, I pulled out this excerpt I really like. When we talk about sustainability, we aren't just talking about the resources, we're also talking about its people. Burnout is a really big problem in open science and open source in general, and they had some key recommendations. So rather than just being like, whoa, this is a problem, which they also did. So 3 of those recommendations were create sustainable communities, that's kind of vague, but free the maintainer, and raise the value of non-code contributions. And that actually, raising the value of non-code contributions is something that's been found in like several studies of open source ecosystems. How many people here use open source technology? Yeah. How many people here contribute to open source? Awesome. Well, essentially, when I was thinking about kind of how do we deal with contributing to open source if we have a lot of people who are non-programmers, essentially we've kind of like redefined what it means to contribute, which seems like a nice sleight of hand move, but it turns out it actually really has some benefits. So there are kind of three key areas that we focused on. One is virtual spaces. The second one is technical tools to make it easier for people to contribute, and then establishing social norms. That makes a really big difference in terms of who's able to contribute, who wants to contribute, and who actually genuinely cares about the sustainability of what you're doing. And spoiler alert, they're interrelated. Sorry to ruin the ending for you. So this is like the Tidyverse landing page, and like right off the bat, always say like this would not be possible without the contributions of the R community, and that is 100% true, like non-window dressing. And we really believe that regardless of your skill level, you can contribute back to the Tidyverse. And if you kind of like look at the specifics here, which I will be doing, like the first thing there is answering questions. The second one is filing issues. These are things that you might not think of as contributing to open source, but I always like to think that like a question is a pull request waiting to be born. That's a little optimistic sometimes, but answering questions is another really big one, and I'll go into more detail about that as I go. So where do people go to contribute, kind of as we framed it? This one's kind of obvious. GitHub, that's one. People go contribute code, submit a pull request, maybe they're patching something. Awesome. I love GitHub, and I am psyched when people do that. But we've also got things like Twitter. You might not have thought, Twitter, not a great place to like debug a deep problem, but it's a really good place to kind of ask meta questions. Or to do like hashtag lazy web, is there a package that does this? That can save you a lot of time. And then there are other organizations like ROpenSci is open science and statistics, and Our Ladies is another great organization that, oh, I did not mean to skip all of that. Yeah, okay, here we go. And others. Yeah, so Stack Overflow, that's a great place to get answers to questions. These all, everything on here, whether it be Slack channels for different communities, our community, which I'll go into more detail about, Stack Overflow, cross-validated, which is more statistician-oriented. They all are great places to contribute, and they all actually serve different purposes. And create different possibility spaces, both in terms of where you might go to learn things and different places where you might go to contribute. It turns out that different populations are attracted to contributing in these different spaces. And Slack, a number of those are Slack, big ups to Slack for existing. Yeah, so there's Our Ladies Slack. If you are, Our Ladies is for women and gender minorities, and Our Ladies Slack is like the birthplace of a lot of fun stuff. R4DS is a data science learning community, and as I mentioned, ROpenSci. So there are a lot of different smaller communities within this that people go to. So what are some considerations? What do people think about when they're considering either where to ask a question or where to answer a question? Visibility. So both for reasons of like wanting to show your mad hot skills, or perhaps for reasons of not wanting to ask an embarrassing thing. So for example, a mailing list, which when I started using R for important things such as fantasy basketball, in 2001/2002, the NBA season, that's how I do my years, there was no Stack Overflow. So so mailing lists, which explicitly say like this will be archived and here forever, which is really great as a resource. That can also be really intimidating as a newcomer. Permanence is, I guess I just got ahead of myself. Authority, like, do you need to be asking the person who made the package this, or is this a question that's maybe a bit more general? Speed, so how soon do you want to hear back? There are spaces that were not on that slide before, so things like jitter, I don't know how it's said, but IRC, I'm like dating myself. I don't know if anybody has ever used that. It was like Messenger for nerds. Thank you for acknowledging that that exists. Speed, like, is this something that you have been thinking about or do you need to know right now? Peer parity, so Danae Ford, who is awesome, and I'll talk about her work a little bit later, she did a great study about essentially what are some of the things that hold people, specifically women and gender minorities, back from contributing in Stack Overflow. And one of the things that they found was essentially like, are there other people here who look like me, which isn't, I mean, like in the face or like avatar, but like, is there anyone here who also doesn't have a lot of experience? Like, how are other people experiencing this? Does everyone else here have, I have 3 minutes? Man, I'm gonna go faster. All right, other things. So Danae Ford, really cool paper. We don't do that here, which I suggest you read. These were essentially, they did just-in-time help for people to ask better questions on Stack Overflow. These were some of the main principles. So basically question phrasing, community triage, and the culture of asking. So Stack Overflow has a very specific culture of asking. Jeff Atwood, who hasn't been involved since 2012, but he was one of the founders, he said that really Stack Overflow is meant to be a wiki. This was from Meta Stack Overflow, like how do you respond to an RTFM question, which is like read the flipping manual. That the goal is a good question and answer pair that's unique. I'm not going to go through these, but this is from a 10 Simple Rules paper in PLOS, and like these are the 10 simple rules for getting help. If you can read these as I go really quickly, you will see that if this is your first time getting help, that like these are really low-key intimidating. And by low-key, I don't mean low-key. Like if English isn't your native language, like that's like do your research. If you have a question, not easy. So in the past year and change, we've been experimenting with RStudio community, which is built on Discourse, which is also a Jeff Atwood production, which is a place for civilized conversation. The finer things. This is what it looks like. And the art of the question, I'm really gonna run out of time. So I really like this passage. Basically, the most useless problem in the world is it doesn't work, but we get that far too often. You might think I'm kidding, I am not. So what does a good question look like? Well, problem, expected behavior, what actually happened. How can we help people get better at that? Give them some scaffolding. This is what it looks like on Twitter. This is what it looks like on, you can provide scaffolding and it doesn't always work. So steps taken, I tried and tried. They're not wrong. It is impossible to speak in such a way that you cannot be misunderstood. Super true. Writing prose about code. So if you think about this in terms of like parsing and deparsing, think about how inefficient this is. It's like, this is what I think just happened on my computer. Now I'm describing to you what I think happened on my computer, and now I want you to deparse what I just described and then do that on your computer. It's not easy. And sometimes, people are asking questions, and this is what they think. Like they're asking you this question, you're like, I need a reproducible example. But in reality, you're just saying like, I don't understand the question, I won't respond. But we made this pretty cool tool called RepRex, which is a portmanteau of reproducible example. It's raison d'etre, help me help you. Essentially, it is self-contained code that actually runs. You can see the input, the output. I don't know if you can see anything. This is what it looks like when it runs. So essentially, a self-contained example that's already formatted on your clipboard, and then you can paste it into Stack Overflow, RStudio community, GitHub, wherever. It's been incredibly helpful in helping us get those reproducible questions. You can look at these slides to your heart's content later. In trying to do this, kind of tried to shift away from an RTFM, read the flipping manual thing, because like this is what the manual looks like, right? And that's short. That was like for gift size that I cut that down. So doing things like trying to kind of guide them through the docs. So rather than just saying like, go read the documents, be like, this is what I'm thinking, this is what's here, this is me being a really good person. But it turns out I'm not really a good person. That isn't what I meant either. Yeah, so you don't need to be an expert to help people answer their questions. So all of these reasons that people have for not contributing to open source can sometimes be reasons that they're great to contribute to it. So newcomers are often in a really good position to help newcomers. People who are competent practitioners, their understanding is essentially shifted from what it's like for an expert's understanding. The level of abstraction that is most helpful is different when you're an expert versus a novice. So boil that down to experts require noobs. I did a package review through ROpenSci. I was super worried that my conclusion was going to be like, yeah, it's a package. But it turns out they actually did that on purpose. They have a newcomer be like, this is what was hard for me to understand. And then once you've started answering questions, which people are happy to do if it's slightly less visible, a more tolerant community, you can move on to advanced things like fixing typos. My first contribution to the Tidyverse was very much that, and that's how I got my dog's name in R for Data Science. Really proud. I think I am over time, and my clicker has stopped working. So both of those things are going on. Yeah, this already happened, but another thing is having, we called it Tidyverse Developer Day. I know the Jupyter people have done docathons. Having opportunities to literally sit there and help people do this for the first time pays off in spades. Like even if you spend all day one-on-one getting somebody to fix a typo, they will then know how to submit a pull request and it's less overwhelming. So all of these places, all these spaces are great. If nothing more, you can do it as a means of giving back. This is my awesome team, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Mara. And we can take a few questions if you can switch the slide out. Actually, I think there's just one question. I'll probably...
Yeah, you can just ask me questions on your own. In your slide about R being closer, where would I place Python? Oh, I would say it probably, I mean, depends. I think Python, having written some Python and no C++, I would say Python is like near R. I have not done that, but I'm a fan of Python, so no language wars here. Sorry to disappoint on that.